This week on Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast.
We get emotionally hooked. And this is someone who, you still have anger, resentment. A lot of people are just exhausted from the interactions and the back and forth. And I've got 15 years left to go with co-parenting. And it can be kind of daunting. And that's why these tools exist, is to help give very specific, simple little techniques that do take some practice. But once you get used to it, you train your brain a new way to deal with it, and your life really does get a lot easier.
Welcome to Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast, where we discuss strategies and tips to improve your co-parenting situation, especially if it's high conflict. I'm Bianca Balogh, co-parent, mother, and entrepreneur, creator of Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger app, and believer in turning challenging situations into something positive. This week, we're joined by Megan Hunter. She's an expert in conflict resolution, a speaker, an author, and the co-founder and CEO of the High Conflict Institute. Megan spent 8 years at the Arizona Supreme Court and as a family law specialist for the Administrative Office of the Courts. She's the founder and publisher of Unhooked Media, a publishing company focused on relationship and conflict resolution. Megan, wonderful to have you back on the podcast. What's new with you?
Thank you. Great to be back on, Bianca. So what's new? We're always so busy at High Conflict Institute, which we, nickname HCI, a lot easier to say. We've been busy writing books. In fact, my co-founder at HCI, Bill Eddy, who I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of, he's published yet another book, which is the Splitting book, Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Narcissistic or Borderline Personality Disorder. So it's a new edition. It's his number one selling book, really. And on top of that, he has published or written 5 books since, I think, January of this year. So that's in 8 months' time.
Wow, he's been busy.
He's been really busy. So, and he and I are writing a book together for workplace conflict. So that's coming up next, but he's been pumping out the books like crazy.
That's great. So is Unhooked publishing all those books or most of them?
Unhooked has published all except the Splitting book, which is through another publisher. The latest one that Unhooked published for him is called Calming Upset People with Ear. And that one comes out here very soon and is kind of complementary to the BIF technique that we have talked about before. So we've kind of broken it down into, in conflict, you need to be able to communicate differently when it's someone with a high conflict personality in particular. In communication, you have written and verbal. So with the written communications in high conflict disputes, whether it's divorce or in a workplace or wherever, people are prone to emailing maybe some really hostile emails, really nasty, personally attacking type of emails or letters or DMs, text messages. And so our BIF response method is just perfect for those. It's specifically tuned in to address written communications. And then the ear statements, calming upset people with ear statements, is specifically for verbal communication with someone who may have a high conflict personality. So that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, I kind of didn't pick up on that they were different for what communication styles happening, whether it's verbal or written, because the calming upset people with ear, which stands for empathy, attention, and respect, is very effective. And then you've got BIF. And I think I had heard that your BIF for co-parents book was one of the most popular BIFs that you've had. Is that right?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. It's very exciting. And I guess it shouldn't be surprising because people are so desperate for help when they're in these high conflict co-parenting situations. And BIF really works. So our BIF for co-parent communication book has been in the number 1, number 2 spot since it published 9-10 months ago. Mm-hmm. It's kind of waffles between 1 and 2, and now it's kind of number 3, but we'll get it back to number 1. But it's really a helpful book. And I think the sales numbers really support that.
I was going to ask you why you thought it was one of the more popular. I mean, you had mentioned just now that you feel like people are pretty desperate for information and help and techniques, But any other thoughts of like, why is this Biff book the most popular one?
I guess out of the Biff series, and we have three now, one Biff at Work, and now Biff for Co-Parents, and then just the original Biff book. I think this one is the most popular just because in these co-parenting situations, they're already volatile, right? I mean, the most happiest, friendliest couple are probably going to have some communication issues if they're getting divorced or trying to co-parent, particularly when a new partner gets involved on one side or the other, or, a variety of reasons. There just can be a little blow-ups. So even for someone who's not specifically in what we would say a high conflict situation, Biff can still be an effective way of communicating because it just takes out all the garbage. But in a high conflict situation, it's so effective and so stress relieving. So at this stage, what I'm hearing from people in the divorce field, and we're talking psychologists who do custody evaluations, attorneys, judges, they have in the last year or two been saying that high conflict cases are increasing. High conflict cases are getting more high conflict. They're getting crazier. They're just increasingly challenging and difficult. So I think we probably see extending that to a need to communicate. If there are more people involved in high conflict cases, it just kind of, it makes sense that there would be this need for a way to communicate. And I guess that's really the key for people is a lot of times by the time people find us at High Conflict Institute, they're really in crisis mode in a co-parenting situation or a divorce, and they don't know what to do because it's just a really challenging and upside down world to be in. And so to have a simple, clear tool like Biff it's just a game changer for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are stressful times. It saddens me to hear that the high conflict cases are increasing, but it doesn't surprise me either, because I do think that increased stress that I think just exists in our world right now can definitely spill over into co-parenting and that communication. So let's just jump in and maybe you can explain Biff and what it stands for and what it means.
Sure. So Biff is just a simple little acronym. And sometimes people say, oh, your acronyms are, why would you use an acronym? It doesn't make sense. Or, people don't like acronyms. Well, guess what? They actually do need acronyms under times of pressure and stress because it's really hard to remember what to do when you're in that moment and you've received that, zinger of an email that makes your heart just right, and you just want to fire off. And I mean, especially the text messages and the emails, they just go back and forth between co-parents, because we're either defending ourselves or trying to set, the record straight, or we're just angry and want to lash back, whatever. It's just uncomfortable. And so they go back and forth and back and forth. And what happens is our brain gets really hooked into that drama or into that defensive mode. And when we're in that defensive mode, it's hard to think. It's really hard to be logical. And so we're more prone to just either strike back, or even if we're disciplined enough to not strike back, we don't know how to respond in a way that's going to, kind of contain the back and forth or stop the back and forth. So Biff is that simple little acronym that you can kind of, remember, oh, Biff, I'm supposed to Biff. And even if you don't remember what it means, you can go look it up, right? Very easily on your phone or anywhere. But basically Biff means brief. So B is for brief, and it's about keeping the response just to like 2 to 5 sentences, because if you make it longer, it's going to give the other person more to come back at you with, right? It's just a Biff is meant to stop the conflict, stop the back and forth. So brief, 2 to 5 sentences. I is for informative, and that just helps you keep it really focused on straight information, because as you know, a lot of these really hostile communications are full of blame and anger and accusations of all, a variety of things, and just temptations and baiting and just all the garbage that we see And so if you respond to all of those, you are just going to keep the conflict going. But if you take out all of the garbage that you're writing yourself, meaning trying to defend yourself, trying to explain, trying to make them feel bad about what they've said, things like that, then you just need to take those things out because they're just going to inflame things. And then the first F is for friendly. This can be the one that people say, hey, that's really hard to do. And why would I want to be friendly to my ex? He or she's being such a jerk. And I mean, I just get constantly hit with this barrage of emails. Okay, fine. But this is what works, right? And it's not about being someone's best friend. It's about having a friendly tone. Why is that important? Because the brain needs to hear that friendly tone through the email, through the DM, in order to feel calm, in order to feel safe. And that's really what these BIF responses do, is help the other person receiving it feel more in safety mode than defensive mode. And, if it's an email, it's, hey, how you doing? Or, hey, hope you had a good weekend with the kids. Or you close it with a friendly greeting and just keep it friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And then firm means you're just going to close the conversation instead of leaving it hanging out there. So you can just kind of wrap it up. And if there's a lot of times in co-parenting situations, as you're well aware, and all your listeners, I'm sure are, there's a need to make plans and make decisions. And most of those are made through an email or a text. So you can close it firmly with a question like, well, what time would you like to pick up the kids on Sunday, at 4:00 or 7:00?
Mm-hmm.
And we're giving them two choices because if you give one choice, what do you think will happen? They're going to, say, no, I'm not going to do that. But if you give people two choices, it causes them to think about options. And you want people thinking. You want your ex thinking. And so if they have to focus on a choice, they're in thinking mode instead of reacting and, being hostile mode. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of it. It can be somewhat challenging at the beginning to just write the email as a BIF. So what we recommend is, number one, ask yourself, does this communication need responded to it at all? Sometimes it doesn't because they've just, kind of just let loose and there's no response necessary. But if you do need to respond, write it out and then BIF it. Check it. Is it brief? If it's longer than 2 to 5 sentences, you got a problem. So you look, I'm going to take out anything that's not informative, anything that's defensive. Is it friendly? Change that up a little bit. Is it firm? Change that up a little bit. By the time you biffed it once or twice, it's usually pretty darn good.
Yeah, I have done that totally, where I write a response and then I don't send it, but then I come back to it when I'm a little more clear-headed. So I like that, to just start cutting things out, making it brief, like you had said, 2 to 5 sentences, and really there's not much more room for anything less than the informative piece, right? So like you just want the information, cut out the emotion and the extra stuff. They can just be unproductive for the communication.
Yeah.
And then the friendly part, yeah, I think that can be a little bit tough when you're being attacked to to be friendly, but like you said, it could be as simple as, thank you so much. I appreciate the communication.
Yep.
Right? Can it be that simple?
It can be that simple. Because what you've just said right there, Bianca, is an ear statement. It's empathy, attention, respect, in some way. And that is, the beauty of using ear is it calms the other person's brain, right? Empathy just makes someone else feel safe. And when you're dealing with someone who has a high conflict personality, we're talking about someone that's really, they have a different operating system. And so we can't expect them to respond or behave or react in the ways that we would expect anyone else to do, right? And so they need to feel a sense of safety when they're lashing out, when they're being hostile, when they're being manipulative, angry. That's all, a matter of feeling unsafe, right? They're kind of in a fear and high anxiety mode. And so giving someone an ear statement gets them out of that mode, and it works so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It can happen. I mean, you can make one little statement like, "Oh, tell me more," or
Mm-hmm.
that sounds really, really challenging. Yeah, it sounds like it was a tough weekend with the kids or whatever. It's one statement
Mm-hmm.
and it can be such a game changer. And then if you throw that one ear statement in a BIF in your written communication, it can just go a long way.
Yeah, it all kind of works together, even though ear, like you had mentioned, is more maybe for verbal, but it can totally be used in a BIF
Yep.
response as well. So absolutely, it's good to learn all these different techniques and use them because it does take practice, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yes. You're bingo.
it takes a while
You're right. That's so
to
important.
learn.
You get it. Um, it's it's a simple technique. Both techniques are very simple, but it can be very hard for two reasons. One, we're not used to it. And we may just get caught unawares. But if you really are dealing with a high conflict situation, you have to be aware, right? And then number two,
Mm-hmm.
we just we get emotionally hooked,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is someone who you still have anger, resentment, or you're just, a lot of people are just exhausted
Mm-hmm.
from the interactions and the back and forth. And I've got 15 years left to go with co-parenting before the kids are 18, and it can be kind of daunting. And that's why these tools exist, right? Is to help give very specific, simple little techniques that do take some practice. But once you get used to it, you train your brain a new way to deal with it, and your life really does get a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of really, really good books and information in dealing with divorce and co-parenting. However, a lot of them just kind of talk about the problem and maybe give some good tips. And I'm not, dissing any other books or anything, but when you're dealing with high conflict divorce and co-parenting, you need some very specific skills and techniques to use to make your life manageable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what these are.
Yeah, that's how I found Biff. I was dealing with a high conflict co-parenting situation and feeling a little bit like I was on the hamster wheel of like dysfunction going, I'm doing what I think is right, but nothing's getting better and the conflict is still so high and it's like I have to find something else that's going to help. So when I found Biff and started using it, I was just like saying to myself, I wish I had known about it so much sooner so I could have implemented it and maybe have helped our situation. So and I do think after many different messages using Biff, it does start to become kind of like a habit where you just don't have to think so hard about it. But how do you know your message is Biff? Like, can you run it by someone or what are your suggestions on knowing that it is or not?
So I think the first thing is, running it through the BIF, write it and then BIF it. Right? Is it brief? Is it informative? Is it friendly? Is it firm? And if you're very honest about those questions and how you respond to them, you will get to the right, it will become a BIF. And then, all of us get hooked. I've been hooked and by someone's really awful email. And I biffed my response and I biffed it a second time. And then I needed to biff it a third time because I felt I knew that I was hooked still. And there was probably something in there that I just wanted to let the other person know that, look, you can't get me.
Yeah, slipping it in there.
Just a little like a rebellious spirit within myself. And those emails have backfired when I've gone ahead and sent them. So, if you feel that you're hooked, run it by a friend or a colleague or, a parent or someone who's not emotionally hooked by that person, because they'll be able to spot it so quickly. And even if like in my case, I know what those spots are, right? I can spot them, but it's my own rebellious attitude that didn't take them out.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we don't see it. We kind of have blind spots, but another person can say, oh, that's not going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
That is not friendly at all. That's going to escalate the conflict instead of calm the conflict.
Yeah. Great tip. And I love about the book too is that there's lots of examples. So you start by the end of the book, you really start to get a good idea of what it looks like to Biff, because there's so many different scenarios that are involved with co-parenting, right? Stuff that comes up all the time.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. We could talk about Biff all day long and you could write a whole book about it, but until you actually see it and then experience it, it might be a little challenging. So just having all those examples of what to do when you're stuck. I think that's the thing. We just get stuck in that co-parenting.
Mm-hmm.
How do I respond to this? And then we're angry, or we're protecting our kids, or feel like we're protecting our kids, and schedules get messy and we get protective, and in those situations it can be really, really difficult. So it is nice to have the examples to kind of go into.
Mm-hmm.
And the authors, it was Bill Eddy, Annette Burns, and Kevin Chafin who wrote this book. And Annette is a divorce attorney in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just really kind of one of the first attorneys in the country that truly caught on to these techniques that Bill Eddy created. And she started using them in her work, and it just really worked for her. So it's not just parents learning these techniques, but it's also the professionals who can teach these techniques to their clients. And then Kevin Chafin is a mental health professional in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
And he works with parents in high conflict situations every day, lots and lots and lots of parents. So when he discovered Biff, he started ordering cases of the original Biff book, and he would require the parents who would come to him for, sessions, co-parenting sessions, he would require them to read the book in advance.
Beautiful.
And then he would,
yes,
I know. And he would ask them when they got there, if they read it. And if they hadn't, he'd make them read it out loud to him in the session. So I thought he would be great for this book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So there are a couple other suggestions in the book, and they start with the letter A. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah. So there's 3 A questions after you've biffed your email or text, is to ask 3 simple little questions. Number 1, does it contain any advice? And that can be really tempting for a lot of people to, say, well, next time you shouldn't do this, or here's how I would have handled that. That's what we call advice. And advice doesn't land well on other people that we're in conflict with. So you need to just strike that out. So even after you've biffed it, take out any advice. It's because what's it going to do? It's going to just get the person defensive immediately, and they're going to strike back, period. So
yeah.
Take out advice. The second A, does it contain any admonishments? So basically, well, you're so stupid that, or if you're not bright enough to see.
Right.
So take those out, because again, it's going to make the person defensive and escalate the conflict. The third A is, does it contain any apologies? And this is always the one where people get a little bit confused about, because they say, well, of course you should apologize. Why would I not apologize if right. If you've done something wrong, it's fine to apologize. But when we're talking about a high conflict co-parenting situation, and anyone who listening to this knows when you're in one, right? It's not like regular conflict, right? It's manipulative, it's mean, it's exhausting, it's never ending, it's attacking. It's, undermining. It could be alienating. There are a lot of things. So when you're dealing with that sort of a situation and you give an apology, many times it's because we are just trying to pacify that person because we're just worn out. We are tired. We are maybe beat up a little bit. Self-esteem is low. There could be a lot of reasons, being a passive personality, conflict avoider, just tired of the fight, right? And so we say, oh, I'm sorry. So what does that do? That puts in the other person, the receiving parent's mind, that they were right and that it really is your fault. Okay. And so you've apologized for something that you don't need to apologize for. It really gives the other person more power. And we often think it will calm them when it really, really just validates that it is all your fault and you're going to be wrong forever.
I think that one is a good one. And I do think a lot of us go there. It just instinctively to try to like diffuse the exchange, bring it down a notch. And yet it can have the opposite effect where it goes the other way.
Yeah, it really can. And when you're in a co-parenting situation, this is a long haul. You're in a relationship with this other person, whether you like them or hate them. Mm-hmm. You have to get good at these skills and these techniques and practice them a lot so that you don't use apologies, because you don't want that apology, that to be in that position where you're saying, I'm sorry all the time. If you do it in your emails or text, you'll just keep doing it, keep validating that they're right. It can kind of almost seem like not apologizing will actually, continue the war. In reality, it has the opposite effect. It will calm things and will keep you from getting back into the war of email.
Yeah. So does the High Conflict Institute have any other resources that you can recommend for co-parents who are in a high conflict co-parenting situation?
Yeah, we do. In fact, we started HCI specifically to address high conflict divorce and co-parenting. That's where Bill, Eddie, and I both had our backgrounds, even though we've expanded into a lot of other fields and areas. But bottom line, it all does come down to these simple techniques for almost every situation. And so we put these techniques in an online course called New Ways for Families. And, a lot of parents are familiar when you get divorced that you have to take a mandatory court-ordered parent education course through the courts, or, like a 2-hour course or something. And, there are a lot of good courses out there, but this one's specifically designed for high conflict cases to teach the skills necessary to handle relationships. So it has all of the good information that all the other courses have and the courts require, like child development and communication and things like that. But ordinary communication skills don't work in high conflict situations. And so ours provides that extra, or New Ways for Families, I should say, provides that extra piece of specialized information. And so you get BIF in there, you get EAR, you learn how to set limits and have boundaries, right? Which is highly important. Mm-hmm. And how to, analyze your options, which I think
so important,
is one of the most important things. And the longer I do this work, the more I realize how important it is to just stop and write a list of your options of how to handle this dilemma, right? It's all about dilemmas and decisions. So let's say you get an email and you don't know if you should respond or not, right? And if you know that you should respond with BIF, if you need to respond at all, but even that initial decision can be so hard. Do I respond? So, okay, take a pen and paper and write your options out. Don't respond. Respond without biffing it, respond with biffing it, wait till tomorrow, whatever. And then you check each of those options for 4 things. Is it all or nothing? Is it defensive? Is it blaming? Is it really super emotional? Is it extreme? And you just mark out any that are, and what you're left with is the right answer.
Nice. I love it. Because so often I think we're left confused. We're in these dilemmas and we don't know where to even begin to figure this one out. Thank you so much, Megan, for joining me again and talking about BIF and We should definitely do one on ear and the splitting book, and there's so much more. So I hope you'll come back on again and we'll do this again.
Yeah, I would love to. And I just applaud you for the work you're doing to really help parents find peace.
Thanks so much, Megan. Where can people find you?
Well, we're at highconflictinstitute.com, and we have another website called conflictplaybook.com. And if anyone's interested, in any of our books, including Biff and Ear, they're on every, Amazon and bookshop and anywhere books are sold, plus on our websites. And the New Ways for Families course is on our website as well. And, you could even just type in or search New Ways for Families and it'll come up. So lots of resources, and just ask us if you can't find them.
Sounds great. And also the links to everything Megan mentioned will be in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast. I hope the time was well spent and you got a lot out of the episode. If so, please rate and review the podcast. I would really appreciate it. If you're interested in sending me a feedback message, asking a question, suggesting a podcast topic or guest, or downloading Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as a tool for better communication with your co-parent, go to peacefulparentapp.com or see the links in the show notes. Have a great week, and as always, stay peaceful.